Venezuela. Once one of the most prosperous nations in Latin America, a lot of recent challenges, but is it making a comeback? Are there opportunities? Let's take a closer look. Hi, my name is Javier Correa, and I'm a strategy associate here at Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs go where they're treated best and find investment opportunities around the world. So Venezuela. Venezuela has been in the news recently, obviously for its humanitarian crisis and all of the challenges that it has undergone in recent years. However, here at Nomad Capitalist, we like to look at frontier markets. We like to look at places that might be the next big thing. So before we dive into the investment opportunities that Venezuela may potentially offer, I think it is important to understand the context surrounding Venezuela. So basically back in the 1970s and 60s, Venezuela was the most prosperous nation in Latin America and one of the most prosperous in the world. However, in 1999, with the election of former President Hugo Chavez, the country took a turn for the left. Now, Nomad Capitalist is not a political channel. We're not here to comment on the policies, but at the end of the day, the objective reality is that Venezuela became more unfriendly towards private industry and more, I would say, unfriendly towards foreign private investment in particular. Now, these policies basically remained in effect up until essentially 2018-19, when Hugo Chavez's successor, Nicolas Maduro, started to slightly open up the economy in certain sectors. So by no means is Venezuela currently, an economically free country, but it has started to open up recently, and that has generated or created some very interesting investment opportunities that we will explore further in this video. So before we start talking about the different investment opportunities that can be found in Venezuela, it's important to consider some of the challenges and why it should still be considered a frontier market for only the most, I would say, courageous investors and those looking for potentially very high returns, but who also understand that with high return may come potentially some high risks. So among the things that we could consider as potential challenges to invest in Venezuela is, number one, foreign investors are currently required to register with the government. So unlike other jurisdictions where you can simply go and set up a company or buy a property, this is not really the case in Venezuela. In Venezuela, you have to go and hire an attorney, ideally, who will help you go through a foreign investor registration process. Now, this is the same registration process whether you're doing it as a natural person, so example me, Javier, as an individual, or whether you're doing it through a foreign entity, be it a US LLC or a Cayman Islands company or a Hong Kong entity, whatever it may be. Keep in mind, Venezuela is a civil law jurisdiction, so if you're planning on using your trust, that may make things potentially more complicated. Now, this process lasts anywhere between 6 months to a year, depending on your nationality, depending on how fast your lawyers can get everything to get moving in the government offices. Once you get the approval, then it's pretty straightforward. You can use a Venezuelan corporation or own Venezuelan property directly or through the foreign entity of your choice. An additional thing to consider in the case of Venezuela that you have to understand, and this is, I think, especially pertinent for US investors who are used to using high levels of leverage and credit. Venezuela at the moment is not an easy place to get loans. So if you're expecting to buy property using a mortgage or to get a business loan for your venture in Venezuela, it's going to be complicated. Now, that doesn't mean that credit is non-existent. You can build a strong relationship with a Venezuelan bank. In fact, many of them have branches in Panama or Switzerland or Puerto Rico, and that could be an interesting, let's say, stepping stone towards your investment goals in Venezuela. But overall, don't expect the most favorable credit conditions. You will most likely have to put up a very sizable collateral, and the terms and conditions of the loans might not be as favorable as what you're used to, especially in places like the US and Canada. Now, in addition to that, we also have to talk about the isolation of the banking system. So while it is possible to get local accounts in foreign currencies, be it, for example, euros or US dollars, those being the two most common, unfortunately, it is not easy to move capital in and out of Venezuela. This is mainly due to some of the international sanctions, as well as to capital controls that have been imposed by the Venezuelan government, which have been slightly loosened in recent years, but are still very much present. Now, luckily, and I do have to mention this as a very important fun fact about Venezuela, is that especially if you are doing business with, let's say, high income earners or even upper middle class, it is very common for people, both on the business level and at the individual level, to have offshore banking. It'll be very common to find people who have have US bank accounts or Panamanian or Spanish. So if you're closing a real estate deal, you could do all the paperwork in Venezuela, but still, the financial transaction goes through US banks. So even though it is a challenge, it is surmountable by using foreign financial institutions. The other element I wanted to mention here is perhaps the difficulty of actually reaching the country. So due to recent challenges, protests, and obviously an international image that is not ideal at the moment, and especially a couple of years ago wasn't great, many international major airlines will not fly to Venezuela. So that has gotten better in recent years. However, the international destinations where you can fly to and from Caracas are relatively limited. So among the most common, you would have Istanbul. So for example, we've talked on this channel about how Turkish Airlines is a great carrier, and which is actually one of the great reasons to have Istanbul as basically part of your trifecta method or part of a hub. You have direct flights between Istanbul and Caracas. The next one will probably be Madrid. So you have big Spanish carriers like Iberia or Air Europa flying directly into Caracas. You also have direct flights from Panama, Colombia, and I believe Mexico. So other than those countries, you do find basically other smaller countries that have direct flights, but those would be basically the big ones. So recent market trends in Venezuela. And here I want to pause and take a look at the real estate market in particular. There's this famous quote by the Baron Rothschild. He said something along the lines of, when there's blood on the street, buy property. And people who followed his advice back in 2017-18 when the Venezuelan real estate market crashed basically have made enormous profits over the past years. The property market and properties in general have appreciated. They haven't returned to pre-1999 levels yet, or even pre-2012 levels when the property market was, I would say, very strong in Venezuela, but there are still some gains that were realized there. So the trend starting from 2019 onward has been a slight comeback of the Venezuelan real estate market. And that brings me into, I guess, what you've all been waiting for, which is the investment opportunities that can be found in Venezuela currently. So not surprisingly, the first one I want to mention is real estate itself. So Venezuela is a very interesting market for both residential and commercial real estate. Having been one of the most prosperous nations in Latin America and even the world up until the early 1980s, there are a lot of beautiful, top quality, gorgeous buildings, both on the commercial side and on the residential side, that are a bit dated, but that are still wonderful investment opportunities. And you can find a lot of those big, luxurious properties for very decent prices. Now, there aren't as many motivated sellers in Venezuela as there were, 5 years ago, but you could still find them, and you can, get a good negotiated terms, and you can have properties for very good prices. Now, in terms of rental income, you can find very interesting yields in Venezuela. The taxes aren't great on that side, so I believe this is more of an opportunity for people seeking capital gains. Now, this video is not particularly about tax, but there are ways to actually realize capital gains on property, especially residential property, without triggering Venezuelan taxation. Now, there are a lot of details to that and a lot of nuances, and this video is not intended to be Venezuelan tax advice, but it is important to mention. In the future, we might do a video on that. Who knows? Stay tuned. But definitely real estate is something that we are looking into. And if you look at the recent statistics, there are more and more foreigners, both from Europe and North America, buying property in Venezuela. It is also important to know that Venezuela has one of the most diverse geographical basically territories in the world. You can have everything from beachfront properties in islands like Margarita, which is known as the Pearl of the Caribbean. You can have Aruba level properties, beachfront properties with pristine waters, Bora Bora level at very accessible prices. And international tourism is starting to come back. In fact, Airbnb is one of the most profitable businesses in the island of Margarita and along the Caribbean coastline of Venezuela, and as of now, pretty much unregulated. So unlike in other countries where you might have to apply for a license, in Venezuela, basically you buy your property, you're free to put it on Airbnb, that's totally your business. You might have to check sometimes the bylaws, the homeowners association, but other than that, you're basically free to do whatever you want with your property. The second basically segment of the economy where we have seen significant growth and where there may be opportunities is in the restaurant business. So if you're out there and you're watching this video and you own a chain of restaurants or you have a passion for cooking, then Venezuela might be an interesting place. Venezuela, up until the I would say 90s, received very large amounts of European immigrants. So mainly from Italy, Spain, Portugal, the bulk of them coming in, especially in the post-World War II era. And this has made Venezuela a great capital when it comes to food. So basically you have great Italian influence, great Italian food, a lot of Mediterranean food, and the dining scene in Venezuela is very dynamic. The Venezuelan consumer market is very similar to the American one, in which, and by which I mean that Venezuelans tend to spend a lot of their money, right? And one of the main things that they spend their money on is dining. So if you want to potentially start a business venture or partner with someone in Venezuela, a restaurant might be a very interesting, segment of the economy to look at. In recent years, dining in particular has been one of the most dynamic economic sectors, and it is one of those sectors where the government has basically opened up a bit and has allowed a freer version of the market to operate. Now, do keep in mind, Venezuela by any means is not a free market economy at this point, but there are certain sectors where more freedom oriented policies have been allowed in recent years, and that has automatically triggered more economic growth, job creation in those specific sectors. The last one I wanted to mention here is natural resources. So natural resources is a bit of a special segment because natural resources are basically controlled by the government in Venezuela. So it's not easy to get into those markets if you're not, big capital. And on top of that, it is important to note that due to international sanctions, it might be important or even required to get approval from foreign governments, such as the US government through an OFAC license, for example. So what I'm about to say should be taken with a grain of salt. However, provided that you meet all of the regulatory, basically requirements, and provided that you're doing things in the right way with all proper authorizations, and I do want to stress that because this is a very regulated industry, then Venezuela is a very interesting place to look at. Largest oil reserves in the world, ahead of Saudi Arabia, diamonds, gold, fresh water, arable land. Many foreigners would even describe Venezuela as a land that is blessed by the gods in terms of natural resources. And you've seen renewed interest. So for example, some of the big names like Chevron, for example, one of the major oil companies in the world and in the United States, has started massive operations to extract crude from the Orinoco River, for example. There are some mining companies, I believe also North American, who have expressed interest in resuming mining operations in Venezuela. So if you're into that market, that could be very interesting. Again, a lot of untapped natural resources there that could be potentially very profitable. Now, perhaps another sector we could look at is tourism. So tourism is underexploited in Venezuela, so that means there is a lot of room for foreign investors to come in and essentially take advantage of a market that is underserved. So as I mentioned before, Venezuela has one of the most diverse territories, from beautiful Caribbean Sea to jungles to huge summit mountains with snow to deserts. So basically anything you might want to experience, you can experience it in Venezuela. Angel Falls, Venezuela, one of the most famous waterfalls in the world. It inspired the movie Up from Disney, if you're familiar with that one. And basically, tourism in Venezuela can vary anywhere from very urban tourism in the capital Caracas, where again, you can enjoy great shopping and dining, great nightlife. And it can also include adventure tourism. Like for example, I've spoken to many Europeans. They are absolutely astonished by the beauty of the Amazon rainforest and what you can find, the species, just the pure colors of what you can see in Venezuela is absolutely beautiful. So if you're into ecotourism, if you're into like the pura vida vibe, like the Costa Ricans would say, then Venezuela is definitely a place to look into. It is also important to note that tourism is one of the favorite sectors in the Venezuelan economy. So just like in the restaurant business, if you decide to move into the tourism sector, then you can find a lot of great potential opportunities. So bottom line, Venezuela, potentially a land of opportunities, potentially a place where you can realize huge returns, underserved markets in many of the economic sectors. And definitely, if you're watching this video, you're a 7- and 8-figure entrepreneur, you're looking for diversification, you're looking for maybe a higher risk jurisdiction that maybe offers you some higher returns, Venezuela is definitely an interesting place to look at. Now, I do want to stress out, as I mentioned earlier in this video, that Venezuela does come with its challenges, so it isn't as easy as just setting up shop there. But if you're willing to basically work with a local attorney, work with somebody like Nomad Capitalist that can help you navigate the local regulations and make sure that everything is running smoothly, both on the Venezuelan side and on the international side, and you're compliant everywhere, then it's definitely a very interesting place to look at and a place that should definitely be on your radar if you're looking to invest in a more exotic jurisdiction that may potentially in a couple of years be once again one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America as it was a generation ago. So if you want to learn more about Venezuela and other exotic or frontier markets, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Instagram, and also check out our website, nomadcapitalist.com, where we'll have a lot of new information regarding not only Venezuela, but other interesting markets around the world that might be interesting for you if you're looking for that more frontier market opportunity type investments.